vibrators vibrate. Dildos can vibrate, but a dildo must be phallic and a vibrator doesn't have to be.
That's true. You're absolutely correct.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Watchmen, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO series Watchmen. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Roger Roper.
Thank you for keeping our streets safe from rich assholes playing dress up.
And this is our deep dive edition where we look back on this week's episode of Watchmen and provide our reactions, thoughts, and analysis. This week's episode was titled, She Was Killed by Space Junk. Raj, what'd you think?
Well, I got to be honest here, Gene. When I look at the way I love to spend my Sunday nights, I like to open a bottle of wine. I like to put my feet up, put Albie and Pippa into my lap, and just, escape the realities by watching an episode of TV that reminds me of my own shortcomings as an adult while simultaneously reminding me I'm turning into the worst aspects of my parents and also highlighting what happens when you're depressed and thirsty for an ex-girlfriend that never loved you to begin with. So I got to be honest, right after I watched this episode, I was extremely happy. So thanks, Watchmen HBO.
Yeah, I don't think we had any illusions when we saw that Damon Lindelof was doing another show that we were going to have a good time by any means. It's hard to explain, Raj. It is hard to explain to people like why I like this show beyond the fact that like I'm a bit of a masochist and I like sad, depressing shit.
Who would have thought a comic book, a show about comics, would have such a lasting effect? And I got to tell you what, I'll take this show though over what was it, the Avengers Endgame? Fuck that movie. This is the kind of quality. I'm just so happy that they're actually doing justice to the Watchmen.
I still don't understand what bone you have to pick.
I hate it
with Endgame. It's not amazing. It's not bad.
It's terrible.
I mean, the Thanos hut thing was a little weird, but whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, this was the first episode of Watchmen where I felt the series is really building a world that I can see sprawling for several seasons. And it's kind of sad that it might just end after one because I can see all the storylines kind of splaying out in front of us, like just in a million directions of where this world could be. I want to live in this world for several seasons. And I'm finally starting to feel that familiarity with the characters. I care about them. I feel like this happens in every great series. So if you think about like Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad, it happened really early on, right? Like episode 1, you saw this world and you dove into it headlong and you became a part of these characters' lives. I think with Watchmen, although it's been a quality series from the start, we really needed 3 episodes to get there, but we're there now. And on top of that, Trent Reznor's contribution to the music alongside Atticus Ross really took over here. I knew Trent Reznor was doing the soundtrack, but it didn't really feel like a Trent Reznor show until this episode. Altogether, the music coming together, the world building coming together, it was just terrific and lonely and somber piece of TV.
Speaking of lonely and somber, the King Bee couldn't be with us tonight, but he did tweet out, he checked in on The Walking Dead, which is something I haven't checked in on in probably 3 or 4 seasons. And it just reminded him of how terrible television series that stick around so long can be. And if they are going to do multiple seasons of Watchmen, I just want them to have a plan. I want them to either have a solid ending for the characters that we're seeing or maybe do an anthology, which you possibly could do here with Watchmen. This really truly is a continuation of the original story. And I don't know what they would do if at the end they close the storyline. Like I don't want a Star Wars Rian Johnson situation.
To me, it feels like there is something huge and monstrous lurking in the background here. And already being 3 episodes in to a 9-episode season, I just wonder if they can do it justice and wrap up that loop that quickly. Although, again, the movie itself was, only 3.5 hours long, and it managed to do a really good job. Well, it's a big story it was telling.
All right. Well, we got a super packed episode here, Gene.
That's right, Raj. You've done some crack research, and so have I. And we've got a couple buckets to discuss. Again, if you haven't listened to the podcast before, we do the show in buckets. So we're not going to go scene by scene, but instead, big ideas, big conspiracy theories, big insights that we had about the episode. And for this episode, we're going to be talking about the biggest character of the episode, Laurie Blake. She is the daughter to the Silk Spectre and the comedian. She was Silk Spectre too. And what tragedy is occurring in her life. From there, we're going to move on to talking about the big joke. Now, this episode centers around a joke. Raj has decoded that joke, so we're going to get into what it's all about, what the punchline is, and why it matters. We're also going to talk about some parallels between Ozymandias and the immortal Leonardo da Vinci. If you think we're crazy, just listen. We're not, or we might be, but we're right. We're crazy and right, and that's what matters. We're also going to talk about this mysterious Lady Trieu, who will be playing a big role throughout the rest of the season. We're getting our first taste right now, and we're going to dig into who she is and what she's all about. And finally, to tail off the episode, we're going to get deep into the shadows, diving into the history and connections between the Keene family, their political dynasty, the Crawford family, their law enforcement history, and the Seventh Kavalry. Super tinfoil coming your way on that one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Like, I kind of wish they had spelled Crawford with a K so I could really make that analogy, but I feel like for a Lindelof, he's smarter than that. He's not gonna pitch a fastball right down the middle.
Absolutely not. And speaking of Lindelof, this episode took on some really, really obvious Lindelof tones, the kind of stuff we're used to seeing in The Leftovers and Lost, in exploring the life of Laurie Blake. So Laurie Blake, if you're not familiar with the graphic novels and the film, she was the second Silk Spectre. So she, as I mentioned, was the daughter of the comedian and the original Silk Spectre. Here we see her in 2019 working for the FBI. She's doing a sting operation. And we get this poor guy, Mr. Shadow. He's just trying to stop a bank robbery. And she busts him as he's trying to run away. I was frankly shocked in seeing her just shoot him in the back. And we get the comment of, how did you know his body armor will hold? I don't think Laurie Blake cared. I think she is her father's daughter, and she's a pretty merciless and nihilistic character.
Yeah, the bank robbery scene was eerily similar. I don't know if you got the same feelings that I did, but it was eerily similar to the opening of The Dark Knight when Joker is holding up that bank. Obviously, Batman doesn't come in and save the day, but Mr. Shadow looks like the guy who's wearing hockey pads and with the shotgun, where, you know, Batman, when he comes, he bends the thing. He's like, the guy shouts at him, "What makes you so different than me?" He's like, "I'm not wearing hockey pads." That's what, because Mr. Shadow even does that voice, right? So obviously DC owns Watchmen and owns Batman. So this is hopefully a very deliberate interpretation or a very deliberate callback to that scene.
Oh, I can't see any way that it's not. He's even got that like fat Batman stubble. Like they're definitely going for that gravelly voice. But what we see here with Laurie is kind of a dichotomy in the sense that she works for the feds. She is performing as a law enforcement officer. And we get this persistent question throughout the episode. Like, is she a good guy or a bad guy? Later on, when she's talking with Angela Abar, she says, you know, that basically guys with the masks think they're good guys and the people who are hiding them think they're good guys. And I eat good guys for breakfast. I don't know if she's rotten to the core. I don't think so. But she certainly seems disillusioned with vigilantes thinking they have the moral high ground. And I think that speaks back to her history overall. Yeah,
I mean, there's a interesting callback. And again, I love visual storytelling. I love little clues. Right after this scene, after the bank robbery scene, you see a taxi pull up into what appears to be FBI headquarters. And she's walking into a meeting. On the top of that taxi cab, which, by the way, I think you pointed out, the taxi cab is Silk Spectre's colors, right? On the top of that is an advertisement again for American Hero Story. And again, going back to that story within a story, or that Black Freighter comic within a comic book in the original Watchmen graphic novel, there's little clues that kind of tell what we're going to see on screen. And it's a picture of the comedian next to a picture of Hooded Justice. And the tagline is, "Comedy begets tragedy." As we're moving throughout the episode, we're really seeing almost the tragedy of Silk Spectre, right? We're seeing that she apparently cut a deal with the FBI, right? Because Dan refused to talk. This is, I think, in Peteypedia. You can see all this, or you can read about all this. They were both arrested in the mid-90s for vigilantism. Obviously, the Keene Act was in act. So while they were arrested, they were offered a deal. Dan decided not, because he's that moral high ground character, right? He's the one who refuses to kill anyone. He believes in the movement of being a masked hero. While Laurie really cut a deal and is working now, like her father did, working on behalf of the government. You can see that this is not something that she wants. She's lifeless. She's really good at her job. She's very effective, but there's no love in her life or her current condition. And that's really what we see on screen as we learn more about her current condition, is that this really is a tragic fall from the person who she thought she would be, which is what happened to her mom and what happened with her father, right? At the end, he was sobbing at the foot of his greatest villain's bed, saying it's all a fucking joke. It's all a fucking joke, man.
We puzzled at the beginning of the season as to why Laurie would change her name from Laurie Jupiter to Laurie Blake, as an homage to her father, Eddie Blake. And here I think we get it. She's turning into him. She's quick. She's got that cutting wit, a person of action, and has her own sort of code of ethics. Also, interestingly, shout out to listener Don Sauce, who corrected you on saying hung to hanged. We actually got that in this episode. I was like, shit, are these writers listening? Are these writers listening to Shat on TV?
Well, I did read an article, an interview that Lindelof had with Decider, specifically about the Laurie Blake character. And he's quoted as saying the last thing anyone wanted to do was present a version of Laurie that was hung up on Dr. Manhattan to the level to where she couldn't move on. And I think that you see that very effectively done, where she is still sustaining, right? She is somehow still fighting crime, but again, she's become her father in her work aspect of her life. There is something fascinating about, if you were dating the most powerful being in the universe in your prime, how could you ever date anyone else? And you see that reflected when she has the owl, in a cage covered, where she only uncovers it to feed a rat every now and then, right? Which is almost the relationship that she had with Dan. I don't know if you've ever been at a point in your life where you thought, am I turning into my parents? Am I, as a young kid, when you're in your prime and you got the world in front of you, you've got everything going for you. You've got the job, you got the girlfriend of your dreams, and then it doesn't pan out. Have you ever sat alone eating a box of Cheez-Its, in your Rick and Morty boxer briefs thinking, where did I go wrong? And you look at your ex's Instagram profile and look and see like, oh, how well she's doing. And then you look back at pictures of yourself and you like sobbily masturbate to your, remembering the good times. I think that's what really is happening here. That's the life that Laurie is living.
God, the internet really has put into perspective like how sad your life is. I found there's two measures. One of them, first, Raj, never go by Instagram, because people are only showing the best parts of their lives. They don't play the shitty things. But two, and I think more importantly, is I found that when I'm asked like, what was the best time of your life, or are you happier now than you ever have been? When it's like 3 a.m. and you wake up in the middle of the night and you just start like looking on Facebook or Google to see how that person who's not even your friend anymore is doing, the person you're looking up, that's the person who was the best person you've ever been with.
Well, so much of the show and Laurie's character is reflective of generational trauma, right? The trauma that's passed down from our parents and like nostalgia of the good old days, right? When you think of Silk Spectre, again, for those who aren't familiar with the comic books, she was introduced to Dr. Manhattan, at the behest of her mother. Her mother was pushing her into this crime fighting. Her mother trained her specifically to become and take the role of Silk Spectre. Now, Sally Jupiter is her mother. That was the original Silk Spectre. Sally really pressed her daughter into doing this until she saw Dr. Manhattan. It was kind of like love at first sight. And she really wanted to be there. So again, that nostalgia of better times, even though the relationship was fraught with emotional distance and the fact that Dr. Manhattan didn't care for really anyone. He didn't care for humans the more and more he went on. And the show is also reflective of complicated relationships with one parents. The fact that Laurie rebelled against Sally. She didn't want to be her mom. Her mom, again, the character of Sally Jupiter, Silk Spectre, was one not of Hooded Justice or Rorschach or even Dr. Manhattan or even the comedian. Sally, the original Silk Spectre, was almost like a PR stunt, right? Where her manager would hire people to be staged at crimes that Sally would come in and bust. So she was kind of a fake. She was kind of a fraud. And if you could, I don't want to make excuses for the comedian for what he did, because you don't want to do that. But like, he saw through that. He saw through that fraud. And I think Sally identified, she knew that he knew that she was a fraud. And I think that's why she was attracted to him. And that's also why Silk Spectre, Sally left a photo of the comedian on her bed, even though there was that attempted rape. And later on, they did have an affair, which led to Laurie. At the end of the day, she always kept a picture of the comedian on her bedstand with the big lipstick kiss. That was kind of her trademark. So it would make sense to me why, and a lot of people on the internet are tweeting at it and having fun with it. Even I did it today, saying that this should be on Big D's Christmas list. But Laurie does the same thing with the briefcase. She opens it up. She's got the big blue Dr. Manhattan vibrator and the Time magazine of a young Laurie, Silk Spectre, hugging a naked Dr. Manhattan. So it's very reflective. There's a lot of callbacks and there's a lot of comparisons that are happening here with Laurie. Speaking
of that connection with her parents and kind of, as you mentioned, being the worst aspects of them, we do see that she is not a happy person. She is fairly depressed in her life, although she does have the Dr. Manhattan, which, by the way, like the worst shaped vibrator in the world. I don't know how that would even be even remotely enjoyable.
It's got its own intrinsic field generator.
But she does end up making it with our boy, Dale Petey.
Oh.
He makes it in the episode. He does it with the little Lone Ranger mask on. Again, another meta reference for you, Raj. You had a big hard on for the Lone Ranger in the Watchmen. It came true.
I think Peteypedia is like the closest character I could identify with, right? Like, he's like that geek that's really into history and like, really wants to prove himself. But at the end of the day, he's just kind of a nerd, right? He's, I brought along my mask because I want to be one of you. And
I think he's strangely likable, though. He sticks up for himself. He's not an asshole. He's kind of got a Dan Dreiberg sort of quality about him. He's got the PhD in history. He wrote his thesis on the 77 police strike. He has a real appreciation for the Watchmen, but he's not a fanboy. There's a subtle confidence to this guy. I hope he sticks around. I really like him. He's like a better version of Agent Coulson.
You really made a great, and I didn't even think about this. At the end of and we're skipping ahead to the finale, when she pulls out the Dr. Manhattan intrinsic generator dildo or vibrator. It's a vibrator. It's I know we're making light of this, but everyone does it. It's fine.
Vibrators vibrate. Dildos can vibrate, but a dildo must be phallic and a vibrator doesn't have to be.
That's true. You're absolutely correct. So she looks at it and she's about to do it, but then in turn, she goes to Petey's hotel room. And I wonder if it's because Petey does remind her of Dan. And that was really the last time that she was truly happy, is when she was with Dan. And maybe Petey is a substitute. Maybe I've done it where you look for personality types. And you're drawn to certain personality types, even though they know that they're bad for you. I wonder if she identified that, and then, or maybe she's just physically using them. I don't know. But one thing I did notice on the briefcase when she initially opened it, the first two numbers were 666, and then I thought, oh, maybe it's 666 because the joke is all about going to hell. But it's 667. Could the long joke be about everyone going to hell except for her, or am I just going to like tinfoil on this?
There is no way that anyone making an HBO show in 2019 passed on the chance to have a number symbolize something. They get boners about this in the writing room.
Right.
It was definitely either what you were thinking or some other reference that we're not getting. I'm sure someone out there will write into host at shatontv.com and tell us what that was all about. But yeah, it might be one up on the joke. Makes sense.
We've seen this before. In the original comic book, Rorschach, during the death of the comedian, he's telling the joke about Pagliacci, right? Is that the way that I'm saying? Pagliacci. The joke goes like this. And this is Rorschach telling, he's like, heard joke once. Man goes to doctor, says he's depressed, says life seems harsh and cruel, says he feels all alone in a threatening world. What lies ahead is vague and uncertain. Doctor says, treatment is simple. Great clown Pagliacci is in town tonight. Go and see him. That should pick you up. Man bursts into tears, says, but doctor, I am Pagliacci. Good joke. Everyone laugh. Roll on snare drum. Curtains. So in the episode, Laurie is telling this joke of this bricklayer, or this mason. She's identifying, as you mentioned, all the different characters. You have Ozzy, you have Night Owl, and you have Dr. Manhattan. And in the end, the last character is the one that's holding the extra brick, which brings everything down, right? It collapses everything. Now, Rorschach in the original story is the character that brings everything down. He's the one that exposes, or is about to expose, Ozymandias's plan. But before he can, Dr. Manhattan kills him. So I wonder if that joke that she's telling, like at the end, she says, good joke, roll snare drums, curtains. I wonder if that character is going to be Laurie. If Laurie is going to be the one that exposes everything. I wonder if this is some sort of foreshadowing, because of also in her apartment, there's like an Andy Warhol painting of those same three characters. The fourth character is blocked by Laurie's head, and then the camera kind of pans to the side and you see that it's a younger Silk Spectre. So I think that there's definitely some foreshadowing going on, and that was really the intent of the joke, is to foreshadow that she's the one that's going to bring everything and kind of expose everything down.
Right. And listener Ashley Schlafly got into it a little bit deeper. She writes about Laurie Blake and says, I personally loved seeing her take on her true comedian role in this episode, paying homage to her father. But the joke was ripe with comic book lore, as well as thematic links to greater series purpose. The stand-ins in the joke for Night Owl, Ozymandias, and Dr. Manhattan are all judged by a being that finds them wanting. They are too evolved. They've evolved to a point that they have rendered themselves deficient by their excessive morality in the Night Owl, excessive intelligence in Ozymandias, and total lack of empathy, Dr. Manhattan. Further, the way they are presented in the joke are an ascending order of those characters that are more evolved, with Dr. Manhattan being the apex of that evolution. Even God himself, who renders these men into creation, needs to be checked. And that is the reference of the brick killing God by the girl thought to be nothing but normal and cast aside by all those considered more highly evolved than she. So this is Laurie Blake in the comics. So there, Raj, you have, basically agreement from Ash as well that Laurie sees herself as this less evolved in the eyes of the masked Avengers, right? Mm-hmm. Person who is the one left standing, right? After all these people have been cleared off the chessboard, Ozymandias, Dr. Manhattan, Night Owl, the one that's there is the one without the gadgets, without the superpowers, without the insanely intelligent mind. Just the person that everybody forgot about. And I think it plays into her feelings about herself and her nihilism in the world in general.
And at the end of the episode, when she exits the phone booth, which, by the way, thirstiest thing in the world, like the modern day equivalent is, me sliding into my ex's DMs. She's actually making a phone call to Dr. Manhattan on Mars. As she's exiting, I thought this was Angela's SUV. That is the car, right? That's the same car?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. So that drops right in front of her. Now, there's, according to Vulture, this final scene can be read two ways. Dr. Manhattan is the one that drops Angela's car near Laurie as kind of a reference to her joke's punchline. And the red glow is from his home on Mars, kind of a cosmic wink down to the ex-girlfriend. Or it could be that the red glow comes from whatever vehicle originally used its magnet power or whatever to pick up the car in the right place. So right now there's really no way to answer the question, but if you had to lean one way or the other, is it Dr. Manhattan throwing down the car, or is it that vehicle?
I think it is Dr. Manhattan, strictly because of what the Trieu phone says to her. It says that there's going to be a 43-second delay between the message that she left going from her to the planet Mars. Mm-hmm. And then as she exits, that's when the car drops. I think it's Dr. Manhattan has heard your message loud and clear, and it's a wink back down, which suddenly makes it seem like Will Reeves is not crazy. Like, holy shit, what if he is in cahoots with Dr. Manhattan? Probably not, but in a perfect world, it'd be pretty cool.
When the car falls, I was like, oh my God, she's going to be killed by space junk. And that's the reason for the title, right? But it's actually, she was killed by space junk actually comes from a Devo song, right?
Right. Yeah. Devo, Akron's greatest band, had their 1978 debut, Are We Not Men? We Are Devo, which is a fantastic album to this day. When I had a tape deck on my 1984 Volvo 240 DL, this is the most played tape I had. So I was very excited to hear this album, which has a lot of great tracks, including the unfortunately titled Mongoloid.
Yeah, which plays right before she's about to pleasure herself with the supposed space junk.
Yeah, and jumping back into Ash's letter really quickly, also, she explains, if you're not familiar with the band Devo, they're fantastic, super nerdy. Devo is short for de-evolution, and it's the idea basically like there is no rule or law that says that the human mind is designed to get smarter and smarter. And so there's the idea that we could actually de-evolve, and in that sense, it kind of is a thematic representation throughout this episode of
that's right,
that possibility. So,
yeah, the de-evolution of Laurie Blake and the de-evolution of society as it gets more and more extreme in its rules and laws.
Wheels within wheels.
Another thing that you touched on that we're going to talk about is Ozymandias. And I labeled this next topic Ozymandias Da Vinci because it looks exactly like he's working in Da Vinci's workshop, right? Like you have, in fact, the statue. I don't know. I guess that is Da Vinci, right? With the Ozymandias mask over it.
No, that is actually Alexander the Great. But Raj, you're 100% correct. They might as well just be beating us over the head with the goggles. They're like, look, you got the goggles, you got the tan sheets, you got trying to achieve flight. This is a huge shout out to Leonardo da Vinci, and I'm glad you picked that up.
We did receive confirmation that this is in fact Adrian Veidt. I think we knew this from the beginning. I don't know why they felt that they actually had to make sure. What did you think of Ozymandias putting on the comic book specific costume as opposed to the Snyder version?
What's so weird about it is that Jeremy Irons is an imposing figure. Like, first of all, dude's in great shape. But also, he is terrifying. Like, when he's stomping on his frozen Mr. Phillips clone, I'm like, God, he's kind of scary. But then he puts the suit on, and I'm like, oh, that's adorable.
Yeah, well, we also finally found out what his plans are for his clone subject. And it's more than just putting on plays and making him terrible cakes. You see that he is actually devising some sort of suit. We don't necessarily know for what purpose, but it looks as if he's using pig skin to create kind of an outer lining. He's using bits and pieces from a knight's armor. He's using glass from his topiary display to build what appears to be kind of a rudimentary steampunk Da Vinci style astronaut suit, right? And if that's the case, where is he? Where he's launching people out into? Right.
Up until this point, I thought, oh, maybe he's in some remote island or something like that. This series of inventions indicates that Adrian Veidt it only has his immediate resources in front of him, right? Found materials, just the things that are around the house and in his immediate vicinity. And the fact that he doesn't have access to modern supplies or a supply chain would indicate that he can't get everything he wants. So I don't think he's sitting there living in opulence and isolated by choice. This has basically made it clear that, like, although he might have put himself there by choice, this isn't some sort of a fantasy island, right? He's not like, oh, I want a castle and to be left alone. He's not pulling a Dr. Manhattan here. This is something very different.
It doesn't seem as if he's there by his choice. Wherever he is, it seems as if it's against his will, because otherwise he would have access. I mean, this is Ozymandias. This is the man, the smartest man in the world. This is the man who built multiple empires of business and taught himself martial arts and all of that. So he's very resourceful, and I love that they're displaying this. But it begs the question: well, where the fuck is he, or when is he? And in the last episode, I introduced the idea that what we may be witnessing from the Ozzy storyline is not the actual time frame as 2019, the events that were mostly seen from Sister Night and Laurie Blake's perspective. So I dug a little bit into this, and if you go to Peteypedia, which is HBO's companion website, you actually see an article. It's actually the first file. There's a headline: Mr. Veidt officially declared dead. And if you read under that, it says Mr. Veidt, who would have turned 80 2 months ago, was declared missing in 2012 after the Trieu Industries purchase of Veidt's companies. Now, this Peteypedia article was dated September 9th, 2019. Now, if he's gone missing since 2012, then there would be a 7-year gap between where's Ozzy? We don't know where Ozzy is, right? Before it finally is released by Trieu Industries that he's dead. So what has been happening for those 7 years? I'm convinced that this little clue is telling us that Ozzy's story is in the past. He's been gone 7 years. So there's going to be 7 anniversaries. In this episode, we see the 3rd anniversary cake just kind of tossed to the ground. You also, in the background, they played Desmond Decker in the Aces Israelites. So is this a reference to kind of let my people go? Is Ozzy viewing himself as a Moses-like figure? There's also like a lot of Black Freighter references. If you know the story within the story in the comic book was the Black Freighter was a man who is stranded or marooned, was doing everything he could, including tying up corpses of his former shipmates to survive, doing anything he could at any expense to survive. And that was an analogy for what Ozymandias was doing in creating the psychic squid, but eventually save humanity. So you're seeing a lot of the things that when he's going out to shoot the buffalo to get a better hide, he's passing by a black flag. Laurie and Petey stay at the Black Freighter Inn and Suites. So I wonder if this is some sort of vigilante prison that he is trapped into. And I wonder if it's the Lady Trieu and her villainous company or organization that's keeping him there. Your thoughts?
Right. So we now have the reference in episode 3 to Lady Trieu. Presumably she's the one who's, buying the newspapers. She's the one that's elected the Millennium Tower. And she's the one that's basically taken over his assets and his company as he's been declared dead. Now, if she wanted to take over that stuff, I think the easy way to do that was make him disappear, right? It could be that he is imprisoned rather than in hiding, as you suggested, and that she has him locked away, which would be very interesting because did she outsmart him to get him there? If so, what's she all about and how powerful is her mind?
Exactly. Now, Petey says in this episode, he's got information from the Argentina desk that his death may not be real. Like this may all be a hoax by Trieu. If that's so, then where the fuck is he? If he's building an astronaut suit, there's an idea floating around the internet that he's not even on Earth. This theory supposes that Veidt is somehow connected with Trieu and then escaped, kind of faked his own death to go live with his buddy, Dr. Manhattan, who created this paradise for him and is staffed with clones made by Dr. Manhattan. There's a reference actually to the Nordis Gordy Mountains, which might be a clue. At one point, Dr. Manhattan in the comics is looking at the Nordis Gordy Mountains on Mars, which is Latin for the Gordian knot. And when Ozymandias was a crime fighter, the way that he would leave his suspects for the cops was utilizing Gordian knots. And in fact, I think in episode 2, he said he yells at one of his servants and he says, something about Gordian knot. I can't remember exactly the phrase, but there's these references to that. And also at the end of the comic book, Dr. Manhattan says, I'm going to leave this world and I'm going to go create life. So if this truly is a world created by his buddy, Dr. Manhattan, why would Dr. Manhattan keep him there such that he would feel forced to create some sort of escape suit?
I'm not sure, but I do want to take a moment outside of the theorizing and outside of the sniffing around for clues to just applaud Jeremy Irons' performance in this role. And also the entire thing with the game warden and the tomatoes and the letter writing, like that was just purely enjoyable TV.
Agreed. And whoever said on Twitter that those weren't fucking tomatoes, those were fucking tomatoes. I was right.
Yeah, someone said they were like persimmons.
Yeah, persimmons.
It's a
I don't know.
tomato.
Yeah.
So, Raj, we dug pretty far into Adrian Veidt's either imprisonment or hiding, the fact that he's been gone for these many years. And I briefly mentioned that this Lady Trieu is the successor to the Veidt Empire. She's the one who famously erected the Millennium Tower and said, "Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair." In the previews for future episodes, we do see this character, and we're not really quite sure what she's all about. I do know that Lady Trieu was a female warrior in 3rd century Vietnam who managed to resist the Chinese state of Eastern Wu while Vietnam was being occupied. And Vietnam has a long and amazing history of repelling invaders, including us. But we see here that it seems to be another character who is similarly obsessed with history as Adrian Veidt. I think she's going to be one to watch.
Again, I don't want to get into supposition and make this 2 theories. And so I want to just focus on what we did see in the episode, as well as what we're seeing on Peteypedia. But in that article, there were books that were bestsellers, like 9 of them, and each has its own conspiracy. One being that Ozymandias was captured by Vietnamese rebels. And so the fact that Lady Trieu was actually a female warrior in 3rd century Vietnam. And we know in the show that Vietnam was won as a result of Dr. Manhattan's involvement and has since become an American state. It would make sense that there would be some sort of resistance. There would be some sort of powers at play, possibly led by a Lady Trieu, that would want revenge, that would want some sort of retribution for America's involvement in that war and the killing of her countrymen. Peteypedia in the article also makes reference to the fiasco of Millennium by Veidt. Now, what the Millennium was a broad set of marketing and philanthropic endeavors by which Mr. Veidt positioned himself as a guru in the human potential movement, trying to evolve society towards a technology-based utopia. So based on its name, the clock seems to be part of this fiasco, right? The Millennium Clock erected. It also brings credence to my earlier theory when we first launched on episode 1, is that Tulsa has got to be something more than just a city in America that had race riots in 1921. Like, there has to be some sort of reason that they would erect this Millennium Clock as part of a broader Millennium plan by Veidt. So there's something there. And again, in upcoming attractions, you do see some of those flying vehicles, which appear to be magnets underneath there. You also saw that the phone booths, the Dr. Manhattan phone booths, are using the True Orbital Array. Those could have been left over from Veidt. So I wonder if the True organization is either sabotage and is imprisoned Veidt, or what if she's working on behalf of Veidt? What do you think about that?
Right. I mean, we saw in the newsstand appearance in episode 2 that there's this little girl going and buying all the newspapers and magazines and stuff from the newsstand for this, mystery buyer. I'm guessing it's going to be Lady Trieu. They refer to it as a she, who is a voracious reader and was particularly interested in getting the Nova Express, which is liberal-leaning publication associated with Adrian Veidt. So, suggesting that she leans liberal, the fact that she is obsessed with history similarly, or at least named herself after a historical character, much like he did. And you can look at this Millennium Tower in 2 different ways. One is she's basically shitting on his legacy, taking from Ozymandias, which is a tragedy about the failure of a powerful leader, or it could be a testament and in honor of him, right? That it's being erected. So it could go either way. Maybe she is actually working for him. It's not uncommon or unthinkable for a person to go into hiding or intentionally disappear, or even when you're locked up, you have somebody else as a proxy operate and further your plans until you're able to return and resume functions.
I mean, we'll see. Again, we don't have the answers here, but I mean, based on what we saw, that gives you a little background. And certainly I think we're going to be introduced and know more a little about Lady Trieu in upcoming episodes.
Now, Raj, we've had a mix of optimism and pessimism on this episode. I think for our final topic, we've saved the darkest for last. And it is this connection between the Keens, which I was really hoping would be like the good guys in all of this. Just like I thought that the Crawfords might be the good guys in all of this. There might not be good guys in this show.
Yeah, we get more background into Tulsa and the Seventh Kavalry in that FBI briefing where, they mentioned that the Seventh Kavalry is related to, a Custer's Last Stand thing, but in all actuality, they're just the clan with different masks. And this Seventh Kavalry first popped up after the Victims of Racial Violence Act, where African Americans migrated back to Tulsa to buy land and open up businesses, and that angered a lot of supremacists as a result of that. Now, in typical government fashion, in order to quell that distaste and prevent any bad things from happening, similar to what happened in 1921, which is why I think they introduced the race riots in Tulsa, the government went in and identified anyone that might have supremacist adjacent thoughts or biases and went in there, just took their guns. And if there's one thing we've learned, if you definitely want to piss off a population, especially like one who thinks they might be supremacists, it's go in there and take their guns.
Yeah, the term alone, supremacist adjacent, just is evocative of the current state of you being able to label anything a terrorist organization, whether it be Antifa or Kurdish freedom fighters or whatever, and basically saying, look, these guys are bad. The guys that associate with them are bad. Let's just be safe and take everything away from them. And again, for people who think that this show is championing a liberal agenda or somehow anti-conservative, there is a steady parade of examples of the show also cautioning against going too far in the other direction. It's so nuanced and so smart. It is a show worthy of starting some very mature conversation about these topics.
Yeah, we also learned a little bit more about who Joe Keane is. Again, we talked about him in the last episode. Just a refresher course, Joe Keane is the son of J. David Keane, who was the author of the Keane Act, which essentially was signed into legislation by President Nixon at the time, outlawing vigilantes and mass crusaders. Joe is a young senator who has aspirations of becoming president. He's the one who visits Laurie at her apartment and asks her to come to Tulsa because the chief of police there was killed. Joe is also pushing forth, we learn, this piece of legislation, which he calls the DOPA, or he was the one behind the DOPA, which is the Defense of Police Act, which was enacted in Tulsa as a result of the White Night. Joe wants to further federalize that and spread it to different cities. Now, why does he want to do that, Gene?
Don't know, but he says his reputation as a politician, as he is running with presidential aspirations, is built on masks protecting people. So DOPA is really grounded on that, which is counter to really what his dad had achieved. But what was fascinating about this episode was I just assumed that this cops wearing mask things was national already. And I didn't realize that, if you look at the feds, they're not wearing masks and they go around introducing themselves. I'm Agent Blake. Are your civil rights being violated?
Right.
But it seems like only the cops in Tulsa are wearing masks. So this is a Judd Crawford localized thing.
So what's this connection between the Keanes and the Crawfords and the Cavalry? Well, we learn in episode 2 that Judd's wife worked for the Keane campaign. We also discovered there's a letter that was released in the third file on Peteypedia that was written from Senator John Keane to a Sheriff Crawford in 1955. Now, that letter is in reference to a gift given by Senator Keane to Sheriff Crawford. It's the painting, the martial feats of Comanche horsemanship, right? That was the painting. All right. He goes in, and you can read the letter on Peteypedia, or we can post it on the website or a link to it. But essentially, there's a lot of reference to manifest destiny, which is the idea that white European settlers are somehow destined to go forth and conquer the world. And anyone that is already there, but not evolved into that similar society, are somehow savages. And it's their duty to go on and do that. And he's presenting this gift almost as a token to passing down and it's supposed to be some sort of honor. Now, that establishes a relationship between the Keene family and the Crawford family dating back to as early as 1955. Now, if you in the FBI briefing, stick with me here, Gene. In the FBI briefing, there's vital statistics shown on screen of Judd Crawford, Don Johnson's character. Now, they wouldn't do that unless there was a reason. They put up his social security, his date of birth, his city of birth, and where he was his last residence. He was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was born in 1949. Now, why is that important? If there's a picture that the camera kept focusing on, and we talked about it in our podcast, my supposition or my extrapolation from that clue is that is his father or some sort of father figure, possibly his grandfather, and a young Judd Crawford. If you were to line up the time that he received this letter and the year that he was born, they kind of match up. He looks like he's around 6 or 7, right? We also discovered the white robe hiding in the closet that has a sheriff's badge. And to me, that's evidence that Sheriff Crawford was somehow part of the secret organization that was related to the Klan, that Sheriff Crawford was now part of this overall conspiracy to somehow take back Tulsa from black people.
So in this episode, as they're talking in the mausoleum, Laurie Blake even suggests that Angela went there to get the KKK robe out. Like that Judd and Angela had that arranged, you know, the sort of like when you'll come over and get all the porn out of my house after I die.
Yep.
I went back and looked at the episode where Angela discovers the robe. The look on her face is horror. She is shocked. I don't think that this was an orchestrated thing. But Raj, speaking to your point, you see Angela with the night owl goggles. She's looking in kind of that X-ray mode through the closet. She opens it up. The camera pans around to her face to see her reaction. And you see her. And then behind her, you see the vanity with the mirror. And the photo is right there. They could not be telling us more clearly that this is a connection to his father, and the father-son connection is there.
Now, what is the Seventh Kavalry? Well, the Seventh Kavalry is being blamed for somehow being in connection with the Klan, right? But at the funeral of Judd, there's this supposed kidnapping, right? Where they're going to go kidnap Joaquin. The Cavalry springs up, tries to kidnap him, but is shot. The perpetrator is shot dead by Laurie. Why would the Seventh Kavalry do this when they haven't even claimed responsibility for the killing of Crawford? Why would they show up and try to kidnap Joaquin if there wasn't a connection? This doesn't make sense here. There's something not right going on here.
Right. My immediate reaction was, they don't want to take responsibility because they want people to not be on high alert and have the funeral, and it's a trap for everybody. But they're on high alert anyway. They're putting locks on people's guns. They're checking cars as they go through. And so it doesn't make sense for the 7th Cavalry to pull off this attack. And I hate to go tinfoily on here, but I get this gut feeling that there's a possibility, at least, that Senator Keene and Laurie Blake, who he called on specifically to be there, might have planned this attack. Like, remember, this is the daughter of the comedian. The comedian, as we saw in Vietnam, as we saw domestically, is very ethically flexible. He's willing to do the dirty work that other people aren't, and a bit of a nihilist. He doesn't really feel the same way about killing and about covert operations as other people. So we see Laurie before she goes out there, kind of knowing that they're going to check for guns. She intentionally wears that ankle holster, and the TV show shows us very clearly that she's putting it on. Keene also, to me, and several people have said this on Twitter as well, seem very quick to go along with it. You're a U.S. senator. Guy shows up with a bomb vest. He's like, all right, you're coming with me, or I'm going to blow everybody up. And he's just like, okay, yeah, I'm coming with you. Felt a little weird. And the 7th Cavalry attacker even made a very overt message saying, oh, you're a race traitor. Felt like he was hamming it up a bit. So something about this whole situation, and maybe we're just paranoid at this point, seems a little off to me.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And there's also, it just doesn't make sense. Like if Judd sets off a war between the cavalry and the police, then DOPA doesn't go into effect. And that would kill Joe's chance of being president. So then ultimately, who killed Judd? And I think that's the ultimate question that, again, if you have answers or you have theories, write into us, hosts at shatontv.com. All we can say at this point is there's some sort of connection between the Keens, the Crawfords, the Seventh Kavalry. There's something going on there between, and there seems to be some sort of organization, because also in that letter that Keen wrote to Sheriff Crawford in 1955, there's a stamp. It's very conspicuous, and it looks like some sort of symbol, like an Illuminati type symbol. It kind of looks like a compass with an eye in the front of it. So kind of like the all-knowing eye, people talk about in the pyramids.
I never thought that a writing team could get more occult and spooky than Alan Moore and get more into the weird corners and dark recesses of history. But this writing team is doing a very good job of it. And to explain that, guys, if you don't read Alan Moore, this is the guy that wrote From Hell. And if you go and look at From Hell, this graphic novel, it is rife with these deep connections between the architecture of London and Jack the Ripper and Masonic groups and secret societies. And so, listen, there is a lot more going on in the show. And that's why I'm like, give us more of this. Like 9 episodes is not going to be enough.
I agree.
All right, Raj, it looks like we're coming up on time for the podcast. If people were holding on to listen to the newsstand mailbag edition, we're actually going to split that off into a separate pod that'll come out later this week. And if you've been begging for the Instacast, we hear you. We're going to do our best to get that going again. Again, with our recording schedule right now, it's been really tough to do movies and Shat on TV and do multiple episodes a week. But the audience seems to be asking for it. The listenership is going up. You guys are writing in. So it seems like something we want to do.
If you're hungry for Instacast and you want to hear at least one of your hosts, probably your least favorite one, I did join W. Axel Foley on his Watchmen podcast, the Watchmen Daily DVR podcast. I was on, he was gracious enough to invite me on there, and we talked, I think, for 55 minutes, which would never happen on Shat on TV on Instacast. So I felt like, the restrictions were lifted and I wasn't contained. And listen, if you want uncontained Roger Roper, just go check that out. So thank you to W. Axel Foley for inviting me on that episode.
All right. Well, that concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Watchmen. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcasts. The website is shatontv.com. Again, you can email us for the mailbag. And if you can get it in by Wednesday, you got a pretty good chance of making this week's. That's at hosts@shatontv.com. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, please leave a review. That helps the podcast grow. I know there's thousands of you listening. We do not have thousands of reviews. So that's how you can help us the most, or share it with a friend. I know you're talking about Watchmen with your friends. Share the podcast. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody. I got friends who are asking me if I'm watching the show. I'm like, fuck, we're doing a podcast. So yeah, tell your friends, because I didn't.
We were expecting kind of Watchmen or Westworld numbers for Watchmen, rather. We're not quite there yet. So I don't know if people are watching the show or just not listening to podcasts. What's going on?
Yeah, I don't know. I think people are waiting for that next Game of Thrones. And by the way, his Dark Materials just debuted on Monday. Another fantastic show that I wish we could cover. We're just 4 guys. We're doing our best to cover everything. But I am going to be watching his Dark Materials, and it looks like it's going to be fantastic. Although it is BBC and it is TV 14 rated. I mean, it's a pretty childish book, but it's good. It's a good series. And so I'll be watching that as well. And don't forget, we are doing movies. We just finished up our Halloween Spooktacular, and we're moving back into a lot of your commissions. We're going to have some rom-coms coming up. We're going to have some comedies coming up. I'm super excited to do UHF. So lots to listen to. A couple of people have written in this week saying that they've run out of Shat to listen to, which is flattering. Thank you. And we're doing our best to keep you fed.
Jeez. Those people need to be locked in an isolated chamber, similar to Ozymandias. Do not let those people out in public. The ones that have listened to all of our episodes. Are you crazy?
Yeah. On behalf of my co-hosts, Roger Roper and the King Bee, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us later this week for the Newsstand Mailbag Edition. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.